this has been a really tremendous experience to be here at the university. I've met really wonderful people, professors, and of course my main interaction with students. And I will take away the sense that this is an evolving institution. It has a very traditional academic ambiance, both in the architecture, in the syllabus, you know, in the meetings, and so. But it seems also to be a place that is evolving, and I like that. I remember when I first came, there was a big notice, you know, several feet long on one of the walls, and it gave all the traditional purposes of the institution from 1789. In Latin, some of it in English, some of it and so on, and I could resonate with that because I come from that background myself. But then as I stayed here, the sign came down and a big one went up in its place that said Science Week, with new modern motifs and so on. And that really was indicative of, I think, what's going on in the institution, that it is, as I learned being here, coming to terms with its past, around slavery, around diversity, and it is also coming to terms with the future of this innovation, science, technology that is sweeping the world. So I found here an environment, as I said, sort of an evolving educational environment, which is very contemporary, very modern, and very relevant. My students and I entered into a journey around the global perspective. And there are many global perspectives. Certainly there is one, I think that it is a little bit weak in the US academies as a whole. It tends to be more Eurocentric, tends to be, not exclusively. So our journey was to see that and to have an understanding that there are other perspectives that may not have been so visible in the institutions. And we took, or I brought the perspective of the world of SIDS, small island developing states, as a geographic category in international relations, an analytic category, an action area, and the Caribbean SIDS in particular. That we have a diversity, a history, we have a very strong role in international relations, we have a strong history and interaction with the United States, and that it is a site, an intellectual site for understanding many features of the world, and the ways in which international relations is played out in this era of plurality and multiplicity, which I'll come to. Well, I learned from my students it's important to keep your ears and eyes and heart and mind open. That I have often said, you know, that I know more than my students because I've lived longer and hopefully have studied more or deeper. But I find that they're also reflecting in a new environment that throws up new ideas, even on old subjects. So I taught a course on the Caribbean and another course on Grenada. And on both of those students gave me new insights in how they would approach the same facts, the same subject matter. That is entirely legitimate. So I learned from them that one has to be open, one has to continuously be respectful of young people and their knowledge, and also their hunger. There's so much they said that they didn't know. And I learned from them a sort of a reaffirmation that what we are in the region, the Caribbean region, how we think, how we theorize, how we understand the world, particularly the world in need of change, that's a hunger that the students feel that they can have satisfied. Well, it speaks to the deficits in the curriculum and perhaps more broadly in some areas of society, that students will not know about something that was quite significant and so close, the US invasion of Grenada in 1983. This year will be 40 years of that experience. So I suppose if they don't remember that, they don't remember Vietnam or the Korean War and further back. So I think history moves away too quickly. And even though it was presented here as a victory. Still, it is history. And for us in the Caribbean, it was a major assault on international law, an assault on what we were trying to do as young nations to try to find our way with success and failures. And that should be known. Otherwise, you don't know how to interact with your neighbors if you don't really know what their own internal epistemological growth and understanding and stance in the world is. I suppose that might help explain some of the areas in which U.S. foreign policy in the Caribbean, certainly in the future, can be improved if students know a major event like U.S. military action in the Caribbean in the last 40 years is unknown to students in international relations. That's a challenge. I posited it as the battle between the use of military force and the use of diplomacy to resolve conflict, and try to link that to what's happening in Russia and Ukraine now. That in fact, when there are conflicts between states, that there's always the necessity to do diplomacy first, diplomacy second, and diplomacy last, as opposed to war. And I think in excavating the diplomatic initiatives of CARICOM, the Caribbean community, during that crisis moment in Grenada, that students could see with me that it was diplomacy was, Caribbean diplomacy anyway, was cast aside in exchange or in return for the use of military force. And I think I hope it gave my students a sense that always keep a keen eye for the diplomatic alternative. There's somebody in that region doing that, and that's your partner. That's a partner in international diplomacy. It's in our neighbor and our neighborhood, and there is an interest in the United States policy to cultivate and to encourage and to support the emergence of strong states that can resolve their own problems and partner, in a peaceful and harmonious and respectful way in solving problems, because we are going to continue to have problems for a long time. Take, for example, now the situation in Haiti, where there is, on the one hand, there is admittedly a deficit, a breakdown in law and order. Right? The state is weak, and the parastatal operations, illegal groups are taking charge in the cities. Well, how do we resolve that? Some countries have been calling for the use of a military force to dislodge them. But the real effort is around re-engagement in political, diplomatic discussions and ways and solutions. And I think that is what will give sustainability and long-term solution. So those students in my classes, some of them are going to become interns in the State Department very soon, starting as this summer. And they will be engaging with these issues all over the world. And diplomats have to come to the fore and stay ahead of the military bastion of strength that we see in these countries. So I believe that neighbors are supposed to have in place, already in place, a knowledge of each other, a working relations, and a mutual respect, so that differences don't become conflicts. The Caribbean has always been a very important part of the hemisphere. Not always seen like that, and I hope my scholarship here, my engagement with the students and taking them to the Caribbean, to the island of Grenada, that they would have understood that reality. Going back to the colonial period, Haiti, for example, Cuba, Barbados, Jamaica, these were the most profitable territories of the colonial period, of the empires, British Empire, French Empire. They were the most valued, and that has continued in various forms. So we cannot and should not be dismissed. In the Cold War period, the Caribbean was seen as either or, and by and large, they try to break that polarization, in a sense, by forming or joining or being active in the non-aligned movement, which tried to position itself not with either side, but on principles, on basic principles of justice, democracy, equality, independence, anti-colonialism, and so on. And so now I think in the 2020s, we are in a period of what I can call, and others have called, complex multipolarity. Very complex because of the themes, the issues, the actors, and it is multipolar. There isn't a single center of power distribution. The Caribbean is in fact emerging. It must be seen, because it is, an emerging economy and emerging region. Both in its economic, you have places like the Bahamas, again Barbados, with major per capita incomes. You have Trinidad and Tobago, that is an oil refining, exporting region, and tourist designation, when tourism is perhaps the third largest economy in the world. So we are a major player in the global economy, in the global society. We've got to be seen as that, and we have major initiatives and actors coming out of the region for a long time now. Those older persons might remember, the call for the new international economic order came from the Caribbean in large measure, along with Asia and Africa. Our viewers might remember the fact that the economic development theory, one of the Nobel Prize winners, came from the thinking of Sir Arthur Lewis from St. Lucia. So it's an area that has been intellectually alive, and it must be seen as that as we seek for solutions to this complex period. For students to, what I sort of hope that they have learned and they have internalized and that they will operationalize in their writings, in their conversations, in their policy work, or in their theorizing, teaching, is the fact that others have rights, that they are not the only rights holders. Big powers are not the only rights holders. They have responsibilities, they have rights, and of course, they have also, experiences that are legitimate. And that, if that could make its way into academia, I think we'll see more global perspectives in the teaching of college students, university students, that the thinking that comes from the same process of reflection and reading and learning occurs worldwide, and is used also for the benefit of humankind or humanity, and therefore is legitimate and should be paid attention to. I would say the Caribbean region continues, and maybe even escalating its role as a democratizing force in multipolarity international relations. That is, it insists on justice, on equality, on participation. One example would be the very small island of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, ascended to, ran for election and got over 170 votes to sit on the United Nations Security Council, an area that has been seen because of its structure as a bastion of power by the most powerful states in the world, the P5 we call them. But I think the region was able to support that candidacy. Wasn't the first one, but it was certainly the smallest, and helped to make Security Council decisions that were seen from the point of view of SIDS, small islands that are themselves very resilient, pursuing sustainability and not just bringing to the table their vulnerability. I think the region is also participating in multipolarity by insisting on justice, in international relations, a theme that is not often used. Now it is it's coming up in the context of climate justice. We in the Caribbean, our slave societies helped to industrialize Europe. That industrialization generated emissions that are unsustainable, and we are suffering from it. Somebody has to help help us adjust to that living, to adapt our economies, our societies, our agriculture, our tourism is vulnerable. So how then do we bring about climate justice, right? You have to reduce, you have to respond with financing, you have to respond with, with good policies. And so I think the Caribbean brings that to the table. And I'll give you one third example apart from being in the Security Council advocating for climate justice. There's a third old burning and vexing issue in the Caribbean that I think would be a great signal that international relations, especially under the hands of the United States, is changing. And that is the case of normalization of relations with Cuba, even with Venezuela, and with other countries who are not of the liberal or conservative ilk. They are more radical than that, let's say. This is an ongoing feature of the Caribbean region, whether you think way back in the 50s in Guyana, in the 70s in Jamaica, in the 80s in Grenada. There's always a pushing at the margins of democracy. And I think that's healthy, right? And the response to it may not be known, understood, or welcomed. But they are not often threats. And I think to drop this notion of seeing every divergent from the norm as a threat to the stability of order is something that has to be and is being relocated by many countries. So the relations with Cuba is important for us in the Caribbean, and it will open up new arrangements of trade, of family interaction, of scholarship, of scholars visiting, and so on. And we think that that will signal a certain maturity on the part of the U.S. to our region vis-a-vis the international system. The two examples that I want to remind us of is the way in which in the 1970s, 1971, President Richard Nixon entered into a rapprochement with the Communist Party of China and Communist China, which has blossomed in the relation today. Tensions and conflicts notwithstanding, the US and China are great partners in a large number of areas, right, including production as well as, exploration. The second one is Vietnam, that it is still run by a Communist Party, and the US businesses are doing a vibrant trade with Vietnam. Right here in the Caribbean, why can't there be such a policy with Cuba, with Venezuela, with whoever wants to explore, with Nicaragua? There are issues like there are with many other countries, right? But diplomacy is a tool that is used to navigate those. And so I think in an area where there are many major and minor players, that the Caribbean brings to the table some old issues and some new ones. Migration. How do we deal with Caribbean migration that is fair and just compared to, European migration? So I think the region has a large number of educated, intelligent, and willing leaders, and are willing for engagement, and they're engaging. They're traveling to the Middle East. They're being sought after by Russia, by China, by Ghana, right, by Turkey, because the Caribbean is highly structured and highly diplomatic. The Caribbean community is 50 years old. It's one of the most successful regional organizations in the world. The Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, likewise, the Association of Caribbean States, CARI Forum, many bodies that are thematic, that have multiple leaders and revolving leadership that allows for full engagement. And the traditional allies, France, the UK, Canada, the United States, Australia even, will always be friendly and have a role in the region. But in an era where the issues are so varied now, whether it's piracy, terrorism, drug interdictment, debt management, climate finance, all of those require a basket of skills and approaches. And you will see in the Caribbean is stepping up to international relations. Some of the international organizations are led by Caribbean people. The International Trade Center is led by a Jamaican. The Commonwealth of Nations is led by a woman of Dominican heritage, and on and on. Our societies have provided global leaders, and they and their societies and their leaders at home can be important and valuable interlocutors for the challenges to broker a lot of climate and international arrangements that are so needed now. And I try to make that visible to our students here at Georgetown. The SIDS, that are spread in the Caribbean, in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean, the African SIDS, yes, are many, and their realities are different and diverse. What they have in common, it used to be this concern about the environmental and geographic fragility and vulnerability, because they're small, they're remote, they're multiple islands to make up one state, and so on. So there was a level of fragility there when they became visible in the 1990s. But small island developing states have evolved, and they are now large ocean states. We have big economic zones that, by international law, our borders go way out into the ocean. So not only fisheries, but minerals and opportunities for the blue economy is an area in which the SIDS now have gained a new strength, a new resilience, a new opportunity. So instead of seeing, so that's my first point, instead of just thinking of these small islands, they're all very vulnerable, they're fragile, and if anything on the positive side, they're exotic and they're beautiful. We take that. We're exotic to ourselves even. We're beautiful. But we bring to the table serious proposals and considerations in trade, for example. And I think what you'll see is that the investments that investment opportunities for the new economy, for the blue economy, for the green economy, those are opportunities at the Caribbean. Guyana, for example, with its vast, vast, vast forests, Belize, with forests, with oceanfront, all of us, are able now to say, as the globe shifts from the old, brown, destructive, carbon-intensive economy, that we will own and lead the process in our own countries, in our own region, for moving into the 21st sustainable circular economy that relies more on natural resources, well managed, well owned. So that's one area. I think another area is in the area of diplomacy, that the Caribbean, our population is maybe half of our population is under 30 years old. They're not going to war. They're going to ICT. They're going to technology. They're going to artificial intelligence. And so the Caribbean has to respond to its population by being led by them, this young force who want to live, and they want to enjoy life, and they want to enjoy their societies. Many of them, therefore, are leading the way in conversations. They want to study abroad. They want to stay home and work abroad. And therefore, I think that we are going to be more and more engaged in the international relations of the era, rather than in preparing for war. And the main mechanisms we have for that is the strengthening of our regional integration movement. And you see a lot of engagement now emerging from the Caribbean toward Africa, one of our natural allies, both from the point of view of the levels of development, the range of there are 50 countries there. We must be able to find some things that we can work on, and the fact that we have an African majority in most of the Caribbean, that gives African descent anyway, gives us a conversation, a starting point for full engagement. So I think because the era is so fraught with new ideas, new opportunities, that we are positioned for that. The example that I use, there are many, but the example I use is the transition in the global economy. Secondly, that we have to work on a peaceful world in which people can flourish and the young people can have their moment in history. And thirdly, we have a plethora of organizations, international, intergovernmental, and international organizational, in general, platforms on which our region can engage with the rest of the world. And so I think you will see a lot of activism. There is one key proposal that has come out of the Caribbean now. It's on the table. I should put it on now, and I've introduced my students to it, which is the Bridgetown Initiative. And the Bridgetown Initiative is a proposal a little bit scaled down from the new international economic order to an idea that financing development in an era of multiple crises is necessary and possible. Yes, let me repeat that financing development in an era of multiple crises is needed and is possible. The multiple crises is COVID, it's climate crisis, it's the debt crisis for many countries beyond the Caribbean, it's the ability to finance a new kind of development. Yeah, we have to struggle with that, and the proposal is therefore, how do we finance that that's affordable when for us we are constantly being hit by hurricanes, by other natural disasters or unnatural disasters, so that we are always spending on rebuilding rather than on building and growth. And the proposal is to make more accessible larger quantums of funding, but also to discount the funding that has to be made available in times of climate or other crisis. So that if we go to the World Bank or other institutions for post-hurricane financing, there should be clauses in the loan agreements that accommodate discount or delays for repayment, and that the amount of financing is not just to rescue or to recover, but to have sustained long-term growth in the economy in key sectors. And that has been studied both in the climate financing as well as in the more general development financing communities. That initiative has come out of a gathering of minds in a meeting held in Bridgetown, Barbados. And so the Bridgetown Initiative has the title, but the content of it, I would encourage our viewers to look at it, because it really does have the advantage, and I said this to my students, of dislodging the notion that foreign aid is being given, that foreign aid will finance development, that foreign aid is a burden on the giving states, that in fact development financing is the language and the program that we desire and we are prepared to use for our development. Don't remember that this comes against the backdrop of slavery, during which people were producing wealth agricultural products mostly or exclusively. They're producing this wealth for Europe that then use that capital to finance the development of industrial growth in Liverpool, in Manchester, in many different British cities and others. And that represented a net withdrawal of funds produced in the islands that they lost. The most egregious case, I suppose, is Haiti, which had to pay an indemnity to France of what is now equivalent of $30 billion, 112 million francs. Haiti had to pay after for it to gain its independence and end slavery. And it took 122 years to pay that. So when it stopped paying or finished paying that loan or that imposed financing on it, it was $30 billion deficit. And the state was automatically weakened. So when we look at Haiti today and say, but they are so poor, that they are also unstable, factor that in. 122 years of drawdown of funds being sent. In fact, the first payment was 4 times the worth of its national GDP that it had to pay to keep France from reinvading the country. Now, fast forward 100, 130, and 40 years later, that sort of pattern has to be broken. And the idea that we get grant has not been grant. They come and they bring in the technical support, the sourcing of the properties and so on. So now when we talk about the Bridgetown Initiative, it is to make available a capital that is a replacement capital for what is taken out in tourism and in other ways, and make sure that it is repayable, because we are a credible people of integrity. And if we borrow, we will pay back. But the justice must be there. And I've said to our students that slavery was an act for hundreds of years of injustice, towards the human being, but also on an economic front. But yet we are now proposing ways that we could finance our development by our own capacity and ability. The Caribbean community, otherwise known as CARICOM, has in its membership Guyana, Belize. These are, especially Guyana, continental countries. And they're also SIDS. And people say, how could they be SIDS? They're not islands. Well, they come with us and they'll stay with us. The history of European presence, the plantation societies, slave economies, language, culture, it's all the same. So for better or worse, Guyana and Suriname and Brazil and Belize are parts of the Caribbean region, and they are bridge countries to the rest of the continent. Guyana actually borders Brazil, and the Caribbean is intensifying its relations with the Latin American continent, with Brazil. So it used to be mainly around the trade and diplomacy. Now it's around substantive matters of agriculture and investment. You can't trade it. Liberal proposals around trade is good, but you can't trade if you have nothing. You can't produce. What are you going to trade? Even in an economy world, you've got to trade knowledge. You've got to trade goods. You've got to trade services. And that's why we are partnering with our brothers and sisters in the Latin American hemisphere, so that we can improve and increase our production, as I said, in knowledge, in goods, in services, and so that we can then trade. And Brazil is appealing to us, Mexico, Argentina, and so on, and Belize, Guyana, Suriname, who are fluent with the cultural dynamics of the hemisphere and the Caribbean, fluent in the languages, right, are able to be strong partners. So we see, for example, Brazil is drilling oil, but it is also expanding agriculture. And its know-how in forestry and forestry management, in indigenous relations with its own indigenous peoples, with agricultural production at a large scale, and with the University of Guyana with its research institutions. All of those have allies on the continent of South America and in the Caribbean. So I envision part of this dynamic and complex multipolarity that I speak of involves that you will see more relations between the islands, so to speak, and the continent, all within the Americas. Some are bigger leaders, like República Dominicana, Haiti even, Cuba, of course, because of language and so on, have already that, initiatives historically going forth. And I think many other islands will follow. I want to push students. I want to push students out of their box or their cage, which has typically been 18 years of an orthodoxy around what the world looks like. And that world for them, is an island, especially coming from a big society like the United States, that they see the world from the point of view of the U.S. interests, U.S. generosity, U.S. power. All well and good. But I live on an island. But I know that I'm not an island. That there are many other actors, right? Some that are very similar, some that are very different. And all of it altogether represents a harmonization of the Caribbean region. If you go to Trinidad, it's very different, although it's so close to Grenada. If you go to Puerto Rico or Martinique, very different, even St. Lucia. But we all find our commonalities and succeed where we can together and try to grow and learn together. And I think that I have to push the students to see the world. They see too much not enough of the world, and what they see it from the point of view of the U.S. A student said to me yesterday, actually, in reflecting on the class as we're coming down to the end, she said, what I liked about this course is that I learned about the Caribbean from the perspective of people from the Caribbean. The teacher, the scholars, so she understands the Caribbean as on its own terms, rather than the Caribbean as mitigated from some other context. And so I have tried to show them that there's a whole epistemology around which people live and learn that is not necessarily the same as somebody who grew up in the Midwest or on the East Coast, right? And for us, the constant understanding that we are survivors is an important part of what makes up the psychic and therefore the knowledge base. Yeah, we theorize from that point of view, right? That plantation economy, dependency theory, Marxist economy, whatever we learn, neoliberal international relations, realist international relations, all of it goes through our lens. We're survivors. We've survived slavery, we're surviving hurricanes, we're surviving invasion. We can survive. That's our core, that's in our DNA. And I think here maybe it's a little different. Maybe it's like we are powerful. You encounter the average psychic. I mean, I'm going out on a limb here. But I think whether it's, expressed or not, there's a sense that I live in power. I'm entitled. I have it all. There's abundance. Yes? And that's slightly different than saying, I'm going to survive this. In other words, something might come at me, but it doesn't matter. I'm surviving. So I'm ready for adversity. I'm ready for challenge, but I'm ready for it. Rather than, I'm entitled to this, nothing is going to happen to me. Yeah? So I try to see if the students will know that as a baseline, and then you go from there. What are the basic theories from the region? around development, around diplomacy, around international interchange. You know, we have our scholars and they have ideas, and the students have to know that. If you want to learn something about Caribbean development, look for a Caribbean scholar. You want to understand something about the impact of climate change in the Caribbean, look for a Caribbean scholar. There are many. There are those who are working with the IPCC, which is a high scientific body on climate change. There are Caribbean intellectual contributions to that. Don't think that they're not, and therefore somebody out of Miami who doesn't know the region but knows the paradigms that can be applied, right? That's valid, that's good, but it's stronger, more authentic, more impactful, and possibly more accurate if there is somebody who has lived and studied it from the font of the region. Basic facts, a basic framework, and basic geography. In the sense that if students have those three things, basic facts about the world, yes, you know, that there are 50 countries in Africa, that, you know, Africa is a continent, not one country, that the Caribbean, you know, is a combination of archipelagos mainly, that they have been so powerfully contributing to the development of the industrial era and so on. Some basic facts. And they speak different languages, just a little bit, yes. And geography, where you know, that this is a map of the U.S., but where is Mexico? Well, it touches borderline. They may know where Mexico is, but they don't have a sense of Brazil, which is the biggest country in the hemisphere and so on, or Venezuela. If you know Venezuela, you can find Grenada or Trinidad, yes. So some basic facts, but also I think basic framework. You know, that knowledge is produced in a very situational way, you know, and as you know, this notion of objectivity in science is not absolutely correct in objectivity in social sciences, especially in international relations. So much of it has been written from the vantage point of the United States as a victor in World War II, right? And that is not sufficient, because that's not all that was happening during World War II. And the theories that came, and some of them are limited in the scope and scale. Even Marxist understanding of the world, it's a whole different period, you know, looking at the working class fully formed in Europe. Working class in the Caribbean is small and not fully formed. Peasant societies are still very prevalent, agro-proletariat and so on. So that I think we have to understand the dynamism of the region, the dynamism of of theory and ideas, and then a little bit more about the role of their own country in the world. That the United States sits on the Security Council. What does that mean? But what I do find, however, is that they're very thirsty for knowledge and ideas, and there are things they know that I don't know. And I was very fortunate to have students from different, maybe ethnic backgrounds. There was a young man whose mother is Danish, so he was able to talk to us about Northern Europe rather than Central Europe, right? There's another one whose parents from Guatemala, you know. There's another one whose her parents were born in India, but when India became partitioned, they went over to Pakistan. So she has this dual understanding of what we call the subcontinent. She grew up in the United States, but the language, the politics. So they bring their own experiences, and to understand where their families, their countries sit in the world, especially in the world of SIDS. India is a major partner to the SIDS, such as Maldives, who are over there in the Indian Ocean. And in fact, Maldives has purchased land in India to relocate its climate refugees. And I told her that, and I said, you know, you could be living with SIDS people when you go back. They're very resilient, so they're an asset. To the next visiting professor, and I hope this continues, and let me pause here and say how thankful I am for this opportunity to be a visiting professor of global perspectives, because I have had my own Caribbean view enriched by being a diplomat. and a diplomat at the UN, which is, you know, the center of the world in a sense, so you have to interact and accommodate many points of views or perspectives and worldviews. So I hope the next person is willing to share the ideas and the experiences, to tell stories, and to take students along with you into your world, intellectually and experientially. I was very fortunate that the university encouraged me and facilitated me to take 16 students to Grenada during the spring break. And on-the-ground experience was very full, and from the accounts that they have given, that it was very rich and in some cases transformative, because they have never seen black people governing. They have never seen the immediacy and intimacy of leaders with people. You know, lots of things they mentioned. Community, you know, there is a real sense of people looking out for one. They've never seen a country without traffic lights or big sidewalks. So they learned not to take everything for granted and to open themselves to new knowledge, new ways of living. And I think the global perspective is about that, because the world in which they are going to teach or work broadly or legislate or practice diplomacy, all of which I think they're going to do from the classes. It's about 30 students, and I think they were excellent. They were really, really the best students. Really, I enjoyed each and every one of them, and as a collective. And I think the next professor will know that they're hungry for, getting ready for their future. And it's a future in which those millions of young people in the small island developing states are coming forth. You know, this is their time as they see it. They're coming forward with fashion, with music, with poetry, with films. They're owning the creative economy, and anyone who can bring that sense of belonging and the sense of inheritance, a sense of responsibility to them, I think will find a very receptive audience among the students here at Georgetown. It's been my pleasure to be here, and I want to end as I started by saying that I see this really as a evolving institution. Learning, I think it says in some, that it's old and prides itself on being, 1789 and Catholic and, excellent and premier, and all of that remain valid, but newness is important too. Technologically savvy, diverse in its population, revisiting and correcting its history, being a real citizen of the world that is authentic, that is credible, and therefore it produces students like that. And so thank you for being a part of this evolving, emerging gem here.